What is going on, everybody? If you're watching this video, is because you are struggling to find a market to open up your Airbnb. And just let you know, every other person I talk to is struggling with the exact same thing. It is the most difficult thing to figure out as to where across America or anywhere in the world that you should open up an Airbnb that's going to be a good place for you to actually make some money and get some good equity and not get oversaturated and all these different little things that are going to happen. And I tried putting together a course here for you so that you can go through the exact same process that I went through to be able to land on some of the best markets in America, the markets that are going to give you the best possible cash flow and help you make it through the tough times when you have that really nice cushion between the cash flow and your expenses there, right? So this process is a process that I've put together and I have worked on extensively. Just to give you a little bit of a background in case you don't know who I am, my name is John Bianchi. I'm the Airbnb data guy, and I have helped find over 150 to 60 properties at this point, right? Every single last one of them is a positive cash flowing property, and they're all within about 10 markets across the entire United States. That's hyper selective on very specific markets for a very, very good reason, right? Now, I studied over 300 markets to be able to get down to those 10 markets that I liked the most. And I used the exact process for every single one of those markets I looked into that I'm going to teach you today, okay? And so all I can tell you is that the process is not easy. It literally took me months of studying market after market after market after market before I actually knew which ones were the best of the best. And, it's not going to be easy, but the process works. And that's just the reality of life nowadays, right? Nothing really that is worth doing is easy, okay? So this is definitely worth doing. It's definitely worth following this process. I know it's going to be a lot, but, suck it up and put in the work, and you will eventually find the markets that you're looking for, okay? Now, I'm going to walk you through what you can expect within this course that you're going to be going through. First off, we're just going to talk about, you want to pick a really great market for you specifically, because if you really care about where that market is, you're going to do an amazing job with that property. You're going to care about it more. But we want to make sure that you're in a market that has really good regulations. And I'm going to show you a bunch of resources that you can use to be able to help your search process of narrowing down and finding that best possible market. The entire process I'm going to work you through with this is starting off with the 1,000+ markets that you could look into and just creating a shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter list until you get to just a handful of markets. We're going to talk about the 20% rule, which is one of the easiest and fastest ways to be able to know if a market is going to work or not. Just so you know, technically the 15% rule is going to work as well. So you'll learn about that when you get there. There's ways of finding profitable markets using the new AirDNA in only 2 steps. So there's a way to do that there. Calculating max rent. The last 3 videos here are going to be a little bit more in-depth with different tools that are a little bit harder to access, but they allow you to get to the information faster is kind of the way to put it. But if you want to use AirDNA, I definitely have all the software there to be able to help you do that. But these 3 here, we'll break it down in a little bit faster of a method. Now, the videos that you're seeing on YouTube right now are just all of these videos combined, right? There are additional videos about searching a market, and that's this entire section right here. And I also go into the arbitrage option and the purchase option, and it's very extensive. There's a lot of examples. This section right here is, I think, like 3+ hours or so. So I didn't want to add it to this video because it was just going to be way too long and no one was going to go through it, right? So everything you can see here is what you would expect. Now, you're probably looking at this and being like, what am I looking at? I'm on YouTube. Why am I seeing this other thing? Why are all the videos right here, right? Well, I have a site, I have a company called STR Search, and STR Search is a place where we're trying to ensure that nobody buys an unprofitable property again. So if you were to go to strsearch.com or click the link down below, you can go to where it says free courses and you can sign up for all of my free courses. Right now, we're inside of the Bianchi method, and this is one section within inside the Bianchi method, and you're starting off with choosing a market, which is this entire section and this entire section. Now, without getting into it, there's a lot of other information and content and training that you would go through. So once you find the market, you then are able to find the best property within that market and make sure you set it up properly and get it under contract and all of these different things that you would want to do. They're all in there, okay? So if you want to watch this on YouTube, continue to watch this. If you want to watch this within my website, you can go to my website and sign up here once again. And it's going to allow you to just track your progress, and then all these additional videos you'll be able to go through as well and get really, really deep into the nitty-gritty details, right? So that's the options they have there. Now, just so you guys know, the reason I put together all this free content, because you're probably wondering, like, holy crap, this is a crazy amount of content. How is this all free? And if you don't feel that way yet, after you go through everything, you'll be like, holy crap, how is this free? Because what I am trying to do here is I'm trying to build trust within the community. I'm trying to build a business around helping people and ensuring that nobody buys an unprofitable property again. That's what I do, right? Now, for the people who want to hire us, they can hire us. We can find you a property. We can point you in the right direction as to what is the absolute best property for you in all of the markets that I've vetted and the ones that I love the most, right? If you're interested in that, go to strsearch.com once again and click schedule a call. However, if you're doing this yourself and you want to build up this skill yourself, what I recommend is, go to the course and go through all this training and learn it and practice it and put it into action. You'll be able to use this skill for years and years and years, right? So that's what we're doing. We're trying to build trust within the community. We're providing an option for the people who want to do it themselves. And we're also providing an option for those of you who do not have time and want to take advantage of the STR tax loophole. You have that option too. All right. So everything is here. I hope you enjoy this. This is a really, really useful course. My only ask, and I do have one ask because there's a lot of free content here, right? My only ask is that you please share this with as many people as you possibly can. That's it. That's all I want you to do. You can like and subscribe as well if you want to. But really, what I want you guys to do is to give this knowledge to absolutely everybody. Because if we want to ensure that nobody buys an unprofitable property again, we have to ensure that everybody understands this process. They need to know the Bianchi method so that nobody makes that mistake again. So if you like this, go to every Facebook group that you're in and just post it and let people know that it exists. That's all I'm asking, and that's why it's free, and that's why we're building that trust and we're doing all this together. Now, I'm going to shut up. I apologize for a really long intro. Enjoy the rest of this training, and like and subscribe. I know it's another ask, but like and subscribe, and I appreciate you guys. See you later. How's it going, everybody? All right, so what we're trying to figure out during this video is what is the best market for you, specifically you, your preferences, your budget, what makes most sense for you, okay? Now, the reason that I'm actually starting off with this is because I've taken hundreds of calls, and there are always preferences for what location you want to be in, what type of market you want to be, how much money you have to spend. All of these things come up every single time. And yes, it's all about the data and ensuring that you're going to have a good cash flowing property. However, you have to make sure that the location is a location that you care about and that you want to succeed and that you're actually going to be willing to go to over and over again. Now, the thing is, most cash flowing markets, so markets that have the ability to cash flow, tend to cash flow around the same amount. There is not one Goldilocks market out there where you can make 2 to 3 to 4 times the amount of the regular market. It just doesn't exist, right? And so when you can find a market where there are, 20% cash on cash properties that exist, that is that those types of markets exist all across the country. Okay, so there are markets that cash flow all across the country that are completely different from each other. So some will be mountain markets, some will be beach markets, some will be in the south, some will be in the north, right? But when you can find a market where the revenue compared to the purchase price is nice and even, they tend to cash flow around the same amount, where 10% is kind of your low side, 20% is your best case scenario, worst case scenario, you're breaking even, right? That tends to be the sort of pendulum that it all sways in between. And so the reason I explain that first is because I am almost annoyed with the fact that people are always searching for this Goldilocks market. And I've searched 288 markets since January of 2023. It is now July of 2023. I've actually searched more than 288. But I've gone through so many markets, and majority of the markets don't work. Right? They're not going to cash flow. There's not enough demand. The home prices are too high, whatever it is. Most markets do not have cash flowing properties. But the markets that do, they all tend to cash flow around the same amount. They all have the same general ability to hit a certain mark. Now, obviously, you can get a property at a discounted rate. You can get one that needs some work done to it. You can get it at a lower interest rate if you can find something along those lines. And maybe you can add something to the property that allows it to go above and beyond all of the other comps. And that makes you, 40% cash on cash, which is totally doable. But that's not what I'm trying to get at, right? What I'm trying to get at is that at an average, at a consistent basis, the norm is within the range I just mentioned there, where it's 10 to 20% on average, which is great. Okay. Now, I went through a really long detail of explaining that because the thing that I want you to think about the most is, what market do you actually want to be in, right? What market would you be okay with traveling to once a year, just to, go and take care of the property if you have to take care of it, or stay in it if you wanted to stay in it? What is the market that you would want to go to? Now, I'm not specifically saying, what city do you want to go to, but what type of location do you want? Now let's run through some scenarios, right? As a Canadian, I want a place that's where it's going to be warm all year round, right? So Florida, Arizona, these are going to be very desirable locations for me, because they give me the ability as a Canadian to escape the winter and go and stay down there during the off season or whatever it may be, and actually enjoy the warmth during the winter, right? So to be able to have that is such a great ability, and it's something that is a really big preference for me, right? Now I'm also trying to be cautious of the amount of taxes that I'm paying as well, and the regulations around the different my property that I would have as well. And that's why I kind of mentioned the Arizona and also Florida, right? Those two states tend to be a little bit more lenient when it comes to those types of things. And so that's a preference that I personally have. And so I'm okay with that, right? However, I've talked to people all the time where they just have a completely different preference. They want to be in the woods, or they want to be in the mountains, or they want to be, skiing, or they're looking for a place that is a blue state, right? Where they are more familiar with those types of people, and they're their people, you know what I mean? And they feel more at home in those locations, or they grew up in a certain area and they want to be within that certain distance, right? All of these are different preferences that people have. And I want you to focus in on what is your preference. What do you care about? Because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And I'm telling you, there are so many different locations out there that would work as short-term rentals. And so it's just a matter of figuring out your preferences, then finding all the different properties that kind of fall within that range, and then going to find a market that meets your requirements, right? Now, another thing to keep in mind as well is your budget. You likely only have so much money you're able to spend. You don't have an unlimited amount of money. And so with that money that you have, you need to find a market that actually suits your budget. Okay, so as an example, Scottsdale, Arizona is usually about like $200,000 to $300,000 more than a comparable home in Phoenix, Arizona, which they're literally side by side, but Scottsdale is a little bit more of a ritzy, high-end location, and so then therefore it's a little bit more expensive, right? And so if you were to be going into one of those two markets and you had a limited budget, Phoenix might make way more sense than Scottsdale, right? And then therefore Scottsdale is very quickly vetoed from your potential list of places to go. And so now it's you're narrowing down your list to a shorter list of places that you could potentially look into. Now, luckily with the new software, you're able to look into whatever market you want to look into and try and find as many places as you possibly want. However, it does make sense to think about your preferences, think about what you care about, what you don't care about, narrow down that list, and then use that short list that you've just created to be able to then start looking into those properties and doing your research in those properties, because it takes a little bit to do this research for every single one of these markets. So you don't want to have a list of 288 different places that you got to go through. You just want to kind of narrow it down to what makes sense for you. So please keep that in mind. We're trying to find the best market for you specifically. You have preferences. That is okay. We can find you a market that meets most of your requirements. Most likely not all of them, but some of them. So keep that in mind and create your short list, and then let's move forward to the next step. How's it going, everybody? All right, so we're going to be going over regulations for this video, which is something that to me is very complicated. I just have one of those brains that does not work really well when it comes to legalese. When you're trying to read like the law or a contract or something like that, my brain just does not comprehend it in the way that lawyers are able to comprehend it. And so regulations for me has always been a struggle, and something that I've had to figure out a easier way to actually get the answers that I need to get, so that I can ensure that I'm doing everything by the book, by the way that it's written out, right? So we're going to be talking about regulations. Now, regulations are extraordinarily important, and they're not as bad as everybody makes them seem to be. Yes, they suck. I agree that they suck. If there was no regulations, it'd be great. It'd be the wild, wild west. You could do absolutely anything, anywhere. You could scale the business so easily, right? However, there's housing issues. There's, the city has to make sure that people aren't getting injured. There's all these sort of different things that exist, and I've gone to the point where I'm not fighting it anymore. It is what it is. I understand why they're doing it. And so we just have to play within the rules of regulation. And every single city tends to have some sort of regulation already built out by now. Now, I've been doing this since 2017. And when I first started, I was super nervous because they're implementing these regulations in these different areas. And I was so nervous that the place I was going to go into was going to change the regulations. I wasn't going to be able to do it. And I still hear people today having that exact same fear and concern 6 years later, right? And like the exact same amount of intensity of fear, when in all reality, like almost every single market is already regulated. The reason I'm going and saying all of this is just simply because I don't want you to stress about regulations. I want you to be happy that the location that you're looking into has regulations. The scariest market to enter is a market that doesn't have regulations in place. The reason that's so scary is because they can put regulations in place the next day that bans short-term rentals completely, like they just did in Dallas about less than a month ago, where almost, like half of the Airbnbs are going to be gone because they're now going to be illegal because of the regulations that Dallas just put into place, and they didn't have anything before that. So a market that has regulations is a really, really good thing. You want them to have it. You want that city to have said, hey, we get that there's this Airbnb thing. We want to allow you to do it, but just play within our rules. We're trying to, make sure that they get their cut, make sure that everybody is safe, make sure that there's not going to be a housing issue within their city because of it. And so they're just trying to figure out a way to make it work for everybody and not just the Airbnb host who's trying to put up an Airbnb and make some money, right? So it makes sense, right? So when you're trying to find a market, you're trying to find a market that has some sort of regulation in place. If you're risk adverse and you don't care about that, then go to the market that has nothing. You can go to the wild, wild west and risk it when the time comes. But for the most majority of people that are out there, you're going to be a little bit more risk adverse. You're looking for a market that has some sort of regulation in place, and they've allowed Airbnb in some sort of way. Now, what I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video is that regulation is step one. Do not look into data. Do not look into anything until you've figured out the regulation. The reason being is because if the city does not allow it, and then if you research all the data, it does not matter. Those people, all that data that you're looking at is either people who got in really early and they're grandfathered in, or they're running it illegally, and you can't enter that market. I can't tell you how many markets that I've actually analyzed only to then go and look at the regulations to realize that it's not allowed or I can't enter that market for whatever reason. It's too many markets. So I have a golden rule. Don't look into a market until you understand the regulations, and those regulations tell you that you can actually enter into them. Now, how do we go and actually look at the regulations? How do you find it out, right? I have a process that's worked nicely for me, and I'm just going to walk you through that process, and hopefully it's something that you can implement as well, right? So I found out early on that if you just type in simply Airbnb regulations and then the city or town or market that you're looking into, there tends to always be resources that give you the answer that you're looking for, right? So just simply Airbnb regulations, enter the name of the place. And so the main and best resource, without a doubt, is always going to be the government website, where they have everything completely perfectly laid out, right? And so as you can see here, this is the Toronto government website, and I can find all my answers there. If I go over to, let's jump back. The other thing that they're going to have, the other main resource that I like looking for is Airbnb's Help Center. They always lay out what all the regulations are. They kind of break it down in a more simple form, and they have links to the government website where you can find all the actual documents that explain it. So I tend to come here first because the government website is going to have a lot of everything written out in sort of contract form or legalese, and my brain just doesn't understand that. So it is what it is, and I'll come here and I'll try and understand it the best I possibly can, and then I'll kind of head over to the government website to understand it a little better. However, there's also going to be a lot of articles from different sites that have actually broken it down as well. And so I actually like looking for the news outlets, even though it's always doom and gloom and it's worst case scenario and all these different things. It tells me what I need to be worried about. And it also writes it out in a way that's very easy to understand, right? And so sometimes they will say, hey, regulations are in place and this is the main things that you should know. But they also might tell you like what might be coming down the road. They're like, hey, they're also considering doing X, Y, and Z, right? Because they're staying on top of these things. And so I actually really enjoy reading a few articles about the regulations from different news groups that are explaining it. So those I find to be very helpful when I'm going through it. So my general process is going to be coming onto here, typing in Airbnb regulations, typing in the city, going to the help center here, which then leads me over to the government website. If I feel like I understand it, great, but I'm probably still going to read a couple of articles so I can get an even better understanding of what is to be coming. However, make sure that you then contact someone who fully understands it and you can speak with them. This is my thing I have to do because I don't understand the legalese, especially when I'm reading it. I try to find the person who is in charge of short-term rentals for the city and I want to speak with them. Okay. So you can do that. There's almost every single city hall has somebody who is the person in charge of short-term rentals to be able to speak to the general public about short-term rentals and the regulations to ensure that everybody's following those rules, right? They are the most knowledgeable person about the regulations. And so you can just simply call up the city hall, tell them that's what you're looking for, the person that you could speak with. And then generally you're going to be able to find that person and they will sit down and speak with you. They'll explain everything to you. They'll answer all of your questions. They may not be the nicest person in the world, but use them as a resource and get all the information that you need from them, right? And then ask them to send you an email with all the things that you talked about to ensure that you're actually getting the information that you want. And I find that to be the best way for me personally, to understand the regulations for a specific city better than anything else, right? Now, that's not the last thing that you can do. You can try to speak with some local experts. There tends to be, people who have quite a few Airbnbs in that market. They're a part of, Facebook groups for that market. You can type in like Airbnb Toronto and look for the Facebook group about all the other Airbnb hosts within Toronto. And generally, there's going to be some people in there that know the regulations inside and out. And you can reach out to those people, try and get on a call with them, speak with them, try and get some additional information from them. Sometimes, as another option, you could find a lawyer who specializes in short-term rentals. So there was a lawyer in Chicago. His whole focus was short-term rentals. He wanted to kind of, niche out to those specific people. And he was a great resource to be able to speak with to fully understand all the regulations that were happening and what was coming. And so he was sort of my go-to person when I needed to know anything. So what I'm trying to say is that there are ways of figuring this out, and you just have to put in a little bit of legwork. And to walk you through that process again, just type in these two words plus your city, go to Airbnb, read up what they say here, then go to the government website, read up what they say there, read on a couple of articles, then call City Hall or reach out to some Facebook groups or try to find a lawyer. That's the sort of process that you want to go through so that you know those regulations inside and out. And we are ensuring that you're not buying a property that would not be allowed to short-term rent. And then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot before you ever get started, right? Again, regulations are the most important thing to start off with your research to ensure that you're searching a market that actually has regulations in place that allow you to do it and you're not going to be doing it illegally. So got to start with the regulations first. Additionally, you want to find a place that has regulations already in place because then you know that they're most likely not going to change it on you. And then you're going to be, you're going to all of a sudden one day overnight, you're now an illegal Airbnb, like what happened in Dallas. That's the most ideal scenario. And obviously we're going to avoid any place that has a ton of regulation, right? Because you're not going to be able to operate a business successfully there. So with all that being said, you have my process of what to use to be able to figure out the regulations. You understand how regulations plays into the market that you're going to be selecting. And you can use this as a resource to be able to get the answers that you're looking for. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions on this, please let me know. How's it going, everybody? All right, so for this video, what I'm going to be teaching you is a way to search the internet or to think about creating a short list of markets that you are then going to deep dive. So naturally, deep diving a market takes a lot of effort. Thankfully, with the new software, it's significantly faster, but it still takes a little bit of time, right? With that being said, we then want to be able to find markets that are going to be the most optimal markets for you to look into and spend your time on researching so that you can find a market that has cash flowing Airbnbs that you could then potentially buy one and enter into, right? And so during this video, I'm going to teach you the process and the methods that I've used to be able to create a short list. And as an example, since January of 2023, I've gone through 300 plus different markets that I have deep dived and researched. Now, mind you, that's way more than I ever expect you to go through. I expect you to go through significantly less, but I had a really big project that I had to figure out. And so I had a lot of markets that I had to go through. And to determine what markets that I actually wanted to look into, those 300, I used the resources that I'm about to show you. Keep in mind, 300 is a lot, but there's thousands of markets out there. So I could have looked to thousands of more other markets that would have been completely useless. And so I had to figure out a way to quickly shorten that list and be able to look at only a specific amount of properties. So what I'm going to show you is the different resources that I've used to be able to figure out what markets to look into and spend time on rather than wasting my time in markets that didn't make any sense. Okay. Now, the first thing you can do is just simply go on to Google and type in best Airbnb markets in America. You're going to get a bunch of different resources of these companies that have listed out what they believe to be the best market. Now, always try and find the one that is the most up to date. I will give AirDNA credit here. Every single year, they do come out with a top short-term rental locations of that year. However, with that being said, I'm never a huge fan of the actual locations that they provide, just simply because they're usually using averages for the home prices in that area compared to averages of the revenue. And it honestly is not nearly as beneficial and useful as you'd want it to be. But sometimes there can be a little, diamond in the rough, and one of these locations does work out, or it's a location that maybe is something that you care about and you want to look into it. And so that could be a good resource as well. Now, there's tons of different companies out there. There's not just AirDNA, and you can find all these different companies that put out lists and read through them and try and create your own little short list of locations that you're then going to deep dive, right? Additionally, you can go on to YouTube, which I'm a huge fan of, and go through and actually watch these different videos of people who are listing out the different markets that you can potentially go into. Now, some of these, like this one here, doesn't really give you a actual market to look into. They're more so just going to give you a process, which is just an overview, and this entire course is going to give you a process that's 10 times better. However, there are videos here where they actually do give you actual markets that you could be potentially considering, right? And then additionally, Rachel Gainsborough is another Airbnb coach who's out there. And every single year she comes out with a top 75 US cities and that you could potentially be looking into. And she organizes it by number of active rentals and revenue. And I have, as you can see here, I've gone through this list. I've organized it in my own specific way. And I've tried to research and use this as a list to be able to then go and add it to my short list of places that I'm then going to go look into, right? So thank you, Rachel, for this. I found this to be a great resource. Look up Rachel Gainsborough and you should be able to find this list. Now, with the type of research that I was actually doing, I had to look for locations that had a large population where we could buy, 6 to 10 different properties in a year's period. And so then therefore I needed a lot of demand and I needed a lot of properties for sale, right? A lot of inventory. And so I actually just looked up the top 300 cities by population and started going through them. Now, I didn't go through every single one of these, so this isn't my list of 300 property or locations that I've gone through, but I have used this as a way to research the markets that I want to then deep dive, right? And you can see here, first thing I did was look into regulations, and it didn't make sense to go into some of these spots, so we moved on from there. Now, another option that you have here is trying to find the influencers and the gurus, trying to find their portfolio, and then trying to figure out where they're actually located. So a lot of these people will make YouTube videos like Michael Elefante up here, and you can then he'll show off some of his properties, right? Whether it be on Instagram or YouTube or whatever it may be. And then you can actually just go search Airbnb and try and find his property. And if you find it, then you can click his little image here. And when you click that, it's going to bring you all the way down to the bottom of the page. You then click it again. And then what's going to happen is it's going to open it up and bring you to all of the properties that he has. And then you can go through each one of them. And sometimes you can even see it in this really nice list right here, where it actually shows off all of them on a map view. Now this is an influencer that's out there, and these are all of his different properties. Some of you might recognize some of these properties, and these are all the different locations. And so I use this as a resource to be able to find different markets that I could be potentially entering into. And so I want you to use these different resources that I just showed you as a way to be creative about what markets that you're going to be potentially entering into, and using it once again as a way to create a short list of places that you're then going to deep dive, and make sure that the regulations are good before you decide to deep dive it, but then also that it's a market that makes sense for you and your budget, right? So hopefully this is a good video to give you some ideas of how to go out and actually find these markets. But at the same time, I just gave you a handful, right? There's other ways that you can do it. There's word of mouth, which tends to be one of the best resources. Just simply being in like Facebook groups or going out networking and talking with people, or going to these conferences and asking people where they have Airbnbs. Because if they tend to have an Airbnb, it usually is a good, profitable Airbnb. Otherwise, they're going to get rid of it, or they're not going to share that area with you, right? So like just networking with people tends to be a really great resource as well. one of the best, honestly. And so, please make sure to be able to do that as well. But once again, use the internet, use these resources, and create that short list so then we can go deep dive into that next module that we're going to be going into. So I hope that was helpful. How's it going, everybody? I'm just making an additional intro to the video that you're about to watch to help you understand that I'm going to be teaching you a concept which you will then use for the remainder of this section of the course, okay? It's called the 20% rule. It's a concept that is for somebody who's purchasing a property, and it's going to be useful later on, okay? So you're going to understand and learn the concept during this video, and in the next video, you're actually going to learn the concept of max rent, which is going to be useful for rental arbitrage. I just want to help you understand that, again, you just are learning these processes, which you will then apply later on in the training, okay? So without further ado, let's get into the video. How's it going, everybody? In today's video, what we're going to be covering is the price to rent ratio, the golden rule as it is in the short-term rental market. If you can find a property that is the 20% price to rent ratio, then it's likely that that property is going to cash flow for you. And so what I want to do in this video is break down everything behind that rule so you can get an understanding as to why it's a rule. And then when you're going to search these different markets, you're using it as your metric to know if there are cash flowing properties in that market or not. And you can figure that out very quickly, okay? So let's break it down very, very simply. The price to rent ratio, if the purchase price is $1 million and the annual revenue is $200,000, then the price to rent ratio for that would be 20%, right? Because this is 20% of that. And if this were to be the scenario, then your property would most likely cash flow as long as there wasn't as long as it wasn't in a flood zone, you would likely be fine, right? So obviously, with everything else being equal or true, this price to rent ratio tends to work out fairly well whenever you're trying to analyze a property. Now let's get into the weeds of it and actually look at what that looks like if we're going to be if we're underwriting a property, so you can see all the little details behind it, right? So if the purchase price is $500,000, first off, real quick, just want to say thank you to Kenny Bedwell for this sheet right now. This is what we're using. Later on, when we do actual underwriting, this is not going to be the sheet that we're going to be using. So there won't be a template for this, just letting you know ahead of time, right? Now, I'm going to break this down in the simplest way. I'm not going to get too into it once again, because we got the underwriting course coming up a little bit later. So first off, the main thing we're seeing here is that the purchase price is $500,000 and the total income is $100,000. That would be the 20% rule, right? And I've adjusted all of these expenses down here so that it would just be the average of a $500,000 home. And what you can see is this number right here. So this is going to be one of the most important numbers for what we're trying to figure out. The cash on cash is roughly about 10%, right? So when a home meets the 20% rule, it will likely fall around a 10% cash on cash, depending on, of course, how much work needs to go into the property, what your interest rate is. So right now it's 8%, but if those things get lowered a little bit later and that drops to 5%, you're looking at a 17% cash on cash ratio with nothing else being changed, right? So that's why we're always talking in today's environment. So with that being said, right, that's generally what you're looking for. Now, is 10% sexy? Not really, right? But to be able to find a property that is going to be cash flowing you 10% in today's environment, that's awesome. That's not even if you were to be, burring the property or adding any additional value in any sort of way. You're just simply making a return on the direct dollars invested into a property, right? So that's what we're looking at there. It's an 11%. Now, hypothetically, right, this is what I refer to as the 100% rule, best case, worst case, right? So sort of like, where do you expect the revenue of the property to make? And just real quick, this whole sheet here, everything will be in the property valuation section of the course. But I'm just going to explain this part right here. So you'll learn all of this later. But generally you're going to have three different metrics, okay, when you're determining how much you think the property is actually going to make. There's going to be one number where you're 100% confident that the property is going to make that amount. You're like, I feel extremely confident that it's going to make that amount. That number should be the 20% rule, okay? So if the home is $500,000, then you want your 100% confidence number to be 20% of the purchase price, Okay. Therefore, the best case scenario should be slightly above that, and the worst case scenario should be slightly below that. So let's take a look at what that looks like if you were to hit your best case compared to your worst case. Okay. So you always want a property that has the ability to hit a best case scenario. So let's say we made, instead of 100,000, 120,000. And then what you can see with the cash on cash, it's now in that 24%, 24%, right? Which now is a lot more sexy, right? 24%, that's in between your 20 to 30% cash on cash, where people are, dying to find those deals nowadays. And so if you can find a home that has a 24% price to rent ratio, that's where it's going to be a lot sexier. So just to show you what I mean by that, if the home did make $120,000 a year, and it still cost you that same $500,000 to purchase, that's going to be a 24% price to rent ratio. However, you also want to be cautious of your downside, right? So what does the worst case scenario look like? And as you can see, if we dropped it by the same amount that we increased it, we're now at 80,000, and the cash on cash is now negative, right? We're actually losing money on this property if we had all of these expenses on an annual basis. Now, this part is probably the most interesting part of all of it, because what I think when I see this is I go, well, what is that price rent ratio? Because I want to avoid anything that has that price to rent ratio, right? So if I were to type in 80,000, 1, 2, 3, and then divide that by 500,000, 1, 2, 3, that gives us a 16% price to rent ratio, which means that if you were to be going and looking for a property in whatever market that you're going into, and you're not finding anything that's meeting the 20% rule, but it's like 18 to 16%, and you're thinking to yourself, well, it's pretty close, right? The issue with pretty close is that it seriously deteriorates your ability to actually cash flow well, right? Because you could use you could trick yourself into saying like, well, it's close enough, so maybe it will work. But we just ran the numbers, and if it meets a 16% price to rent ratio, you're not making any money, right? And you could say to yourself, well, it meets 16%, but my best case is 100,000. And if that's the way you want to think about it, you're going to be taking on way more risk. And the reason being is because your best cases should not be your goal, and it should not be the number one scenario that you're hoping works out. It shouldn't. The stars should not have to align for it to work out for you to actually move forward with the property. In reality, you should be okay with your property hitting the worst case scenario, and you still being able to hold on to the property, be able to wait for those better years, whatever it may be. But you shouldn't really move forward with the property unless you're comfortable and okay with the worst case scenario. That is also a golden rule. So with all of this being said, right, you want the market that you're looking into to have properties that seem like they're going to be able to hit that 20% rule, because as you just saw, that's where we're going to find the properties that are actually going to cash flow and give us the potential to get that beautiful in between that 20 and 30% cash on cash. So as we go into these next videos, we're going to be talking about that a lot. We're going to be talking about the 20% rule, and that now you know why we're talking about the 20% rule so much. Okay. So hope that made sense, and we'll see you in the next video. How's it going, everybody? What I'm going to be teaching you here is how to use the new AirDNA to be able to find profitable markets in only 2 steps. Now, what I've been trying to teach you in this entire section of the course is essentially how to create a short list. So there's thousands of markets that you could potentially enter into. And what we want to do is narrow down the number of markets that you're actually going to deep dive, because deep diving takes a crazy amount of time. And so with the new AirDNA, we are going to be able to review the data on every single property in the entire world for $15 a month, which, got to give them credit, that's pretty impressive. And so what I'm going to teach you is how I'm using that new AirDNA to be able to figure out if a market makes sense to invest in or not, right? And if I should add it to my short list of a market to deep dive, like I just said, okay? And so it's not overly complicated, but you do have to go through a process to be able to figure out if it's going to work or not. I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out just to get to the point of realizing that you can just do it in 2 steps, and that that it can become extremely clear. So let me walk you through this. Let me make sure that you can understand exactly what you're looking for. And then you can, again, find some markets to add to your short list. So the first thing that we're going to do the first thing you need to know, right, prior to this. So for this process to actually work out for you, you need to know a couple of things. First, you need to know the difference between good data and bad data, which you should have already learned by the videos prior to this. How to use AirDNA as well. You should have an understanding of how to use AirDNA. You should have learned from one of my videos about how to actually interact with AirDNA. And the last one is the 20% rule. So you should know the 20% rule as well, have an understanding of all these things. Again, all these videos you should have already went through. If you haven't, go back, watch those videos, and then this is going to make a lot more sense. A bit of a disclaimer here is that this process does not work very well with really large cities. So I tried to figure out a process that could work across the board for all the different markets. And what I realized was the process worked well for like a medium sized city and anything smaller than that. But when it came to a major city, like in Austin, it became really difficult to determine if a market had revenue potential or not. There was just so much data and so much information. Even like a Scottsdale, it was hard to be able to tell in that area as well. So when you are looking into a larger city, what I recommend is just get a profit map. If you're considering going into Austin, if you're considering going into Scottsdale, if you're considering going to any of these markets, just get a profit map for those areas because there's so much data and the profit map is designed to be able to navigate that data in the most effective way possible. AirDNA is not. And so add it to your short list if it's a really major market, get a profit map for it, and deep dive it. Every other market that you're considering that might be smaller, go through this process, review it on with the process I'm about to show you, and then decide if it should be on your short list or not. Okay. So let's get into it. Finding profitable markets using the new AirDNA in only 2 steps. The 2 steps are finding an average property. So this is important, an average property with good data. Good data is the most important thing out there. And then the next thing you're going to do is find a comparable property on Zillow that meets the 20% rule. Okay. So the first part here of finding an average property with good data, a couple of tips, and I have a bunch of different examples I'm going to go through up here, but I just want to walk you through the entire process first. So the couple of tips here is that you want to only study 1 bedroom size at a time. It makes it significantly easier to be able to see a trend in the data when you're only looking at 1 bedroom. Once you start adding in all the different bedrooms, there's so many different variations as to why 1 bedroom is doing as well as a 4 bedroom, and it can get fairly confusing. So I like to focus in on just 1 bedroom at a time. And then from there, make sure that if you want to, you can narrow down the location for the property you're looking into. So say if you're looking into a fairly good sized location, you could narrow it down to 1 zip code if you wanted to. And then obviously we're going to be reviewing the listings fairly in depth to understand the finer details of the properties we're going to look into. Again, I'm going to go through this in just a minute. Then step 2, once we have found a average property with good data, the step 2 is to then find a comparable property on Zillow, once again, that meets the 20% rule. And so we want to add filters to Zillow that are going to be based around the 20% rule. So we'll get into that as well. And we're going to draw a circle around that area. Drawing the circle makes it really easy to be able to only look at the properties that we want to look at and not everything else. Again, we'll get into it in just a second. And then the results, the objective of this is that we want 2 things are going to happen. One is that properties are not going to show up. So in other words, we go to look on Zillow to find properties that meet the 20% rule and nothing shows up. And so if no homes meet the 20% rule, then there's no cash flowing homes in that area, right? And if that's the case, what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that process again with either the same bedroom count or a different bedroom count. We're just going to kind of continue down that process kind of over and over again until we have completely confirmed that there are absolutely no properties that show up that meet the 20% rule. If that's the case, then we're gonna remove this market off of our list of potential markets to enter into. And then the next thing is that if we have properties that do show up on the that meet the 20% rules, like the properties do show up on Zillow, well, then that means that the market most likely has properties that will cash flow, and we want to add it to our short list of markets to deep dive if it meets all of our other criteria, such as regulation, best for you, different things along those lines. Okay. So the first thing I want to show you, or how you go about this, again, you need to understand AirDNA, but I will give you a quick walkthrough. For this scenario, I'm actually looking into Atlanta, which I'm sure a ton of you are going to consider it to be a major market similar to an Austin, but I find Atlanta to be significantly easier to navigate in comparison to them. In comparison to Austin. And so in my mind, Atlanta is sort of a medium-sized city in comparison when it comes to Airbnb. Let's put it that way. So first thing I did was looked into Atlanta. And then what I did from there was I added some filters in here based off of what I wanted to look into. So for me personally, I wanted to see entire places that were only homes. I wanted to look into 4 bedrooms, and I didn't really care about these features here. So I just wanted to look at the 4 bedrooms across Atlanta. And when I do that, it would have clicked apply, and then obviously I'd be only now looking at just the 4 bedrooms. But what I also had to do was come over here and organize it from who's making the most to who's making the least, right? Which is the most important to be able to see that trend nicely. Then from there, what I'm going to start doing is looking for an average property. And the reason you need an average property is because you have to, the average property is going to be more common than a super unique, a luxury, a property with a lot of characteristics, an old barn that's been restored. Like those things are going to be extremely rare. And so if you go and, find a property here and then try and find it on Zillow, you're not going to find a comparable property. So you want to find an average property, one that's, likely to show up over and over again, and ensure that it is good data. So as an example, you can see this one here has a pool with a bridge that goes over it. That's very rare. This one here has, these really high ceilings, and it's wood, and it's exposed wood with these beautiful windows. That's going to be rare as well, right? So these things I'm not really caring too much about, and I don't really want to look too much into. Now, what I would do is I kind of keep going through this process until I did find some more comparable homes. Now, the home I would be looking for is this one here, because I did obviously pull up some examples. And so what I would have done is maybe get to this point where I see this really nice looking house. You can see right there. It's got 261 reviews. It's been available for 365 days. And I can see it's making almost $120,000 a year. So I would review it, and I would then click the link right here, which would pop open the Airbnb listing, which we have right here. And then what I would do is review this property. So the first thing I want to do is actually just take a look at where it's located. So I can see the black one here is obviously the Airbnb listing that is over here. And so as I would scroll out, I can see that that's downtown Atlanta, and it's right to the right of downtown Atlanta. I go, okay, sounds good. And then I look at the property, and I can see that it's a 4-bedroom. Obviously, it's a 4-bedroom, but a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. I can see it's a new build. I can see the homes beside it are also really nice. It's very clearly a luxury property with a lot of common space to it. So this is the part where you've got to review the listing, right? Like try to understand exactly the size, some main features. Because when I go and look then on Zillow, I want to be able to find a property that's comparable, right? Like I want to know what I'm matching it up to. Makes tons of logical sense. I think we get the general idea. It's a really nice new build home, right? And so then from there, what I would do is go over to Zillow. And on Zillow, I would add in all my features. So I know that the property is making $120,000 a year. So I put it up to $650 just in case I can maybe get a discount on that property. I know I'm looking at a 4-bedroom that's going to need more than 1 bathroom. I know I'm looking at just a house, and I want to make sure I'm not looking into an area that has any HOAs. Okay. And I would click apply to all of that. And then what I would do is I would click this button here that says draw, and I would circle around the right-hand side of Atlanta, which is exactly where this property is located. And then you click apply, and now all of a sudden you're only looking at the homes that meet that criteria. Now, the reason why this is so helpful is because they show up over here on the right, and you can very easily see these properties. Now, very quickly, it's super obvious that not one of those homes is even remotely as nice as this one here, right? So you can see like that's a significantly smaller home. This one here for $550, it doesn't even remotely come close to as nice as that one. So it's very obvious very quickly that none of these homes that fall within that specific area and within this specific sort of buy box meet the 20% rule compared to this home here. And so at this point, you would tell yourself like, all right, this type of home does not meet the 20% rule. Can I find another home if I were to continue going through the list of all the properties that I see here on AirDNA? Can I find another home that would meet the 20% rule, right? And so at this point, you would keep scrolling through to find another average home with good data, and then you would try once again to find it on Zillow. And so as an example, let's say I would have kept going through, and this one is, just a little bit further down. It's only doing 97 instead of 117. But it's at first glance, you can see if we take a look at the property, I already confirmed that's good data. What you can see is that it's more of a lower quality home. It's obviously making $20,000 less, but it's still like a decent home. Like it's a good looking home. It's not a luxury home, but it's a good listing, which I like to see. And I can see that they're almost making $100,000 a year. It's nice and well put together. The interior is clearly rebuilt, redone. I can see that it's got a large dining space here, large living room. So there's a lot of common space in this 4-bedroom. The kitchen itself is well put together. It's got a nice deck out here. So I'm reviewing the property. I always have to review the property before I actually go and try and find the property on Zillow, because I want to make sure I'm comparing it properly. And I go, okay, and it's got a decent backyard as well. So I go, okay, now I understand this property. Where is it located, right? So I can see now it's to the left of downtown Atlanta instead of to the right. So I go, okay, it's right to the left. And then what I would do is do the same thing, add in all of my criteria up here to make sure that it meets the 20% rule, right? Because if I take this off, a bunch of other properties are going to show up. So I've got it kind of narrowed down. And then I drew a circle to the left of downtown. You can see downtown right there. So we're looking at the left. And what you can see on the right-hand side are all of the properties, right? And so if I scroll for just a second, I come across this property here, which is a 4-bedroom, 4-bath. It's nice and large, just like the one we were just looking at. It's $550, so it's a little bit more expensive because this property is only making, 100,000. So it's technically like 19% rule or so, 18% rule. But maybe I can get this down a little bit, and maybe I can put together a better listing than this one, right? Kind of things I'm considering. But just in general, like, do I think this property is comparable to that property at this price point? And what you can see is that it has a really large dining space here in the living space. It's actually a little bit more of a higher end property. When you look at the kitchen and sort of the way it's been put together, I think it would just be like a touch higher end in comparison to the last one. So now all of a sudden, I think that this property is extremely comparable to this property, if not better, right? So if not, if anything, it could do better. Now the backyard is not nice, but we could always put grass in there. So instantly, I'm like, okay, this property would meet the 20% rule if I were to purchase it based on the data that I'm seeing. Therefore, Atlanta does have properties that can meet the 20% rule. That's really almost all I need to add a market to my short list to then deep dive it. If I can find one property that meets the 20% rule kind of clearly, then I have confidence that if I were to deep dive that market, I could find an even better property, right? Maybe one that meets the 25% rule or something, understanding all of the ways of increasing and maximizing revenue within that specific market by truly deep diving it. Because what we're doing is just high level right now. So by doing this, I would go, okay, great. It does meet the 20% rule. And at that point, what we would do is add it to our short list, right? So at that point, we are adding it to our short list. We go, okay, Atlanta is now a market that has revenue potential, cash flow potential, added to our short list. Now, if you wanted to be a stickler about this and you really wanted to not waste your time of deep diving a market or having to buy a profit map and then realizing, oh, it's just this one-off random property, you can repeat this process again, right? So you could either do one of two things. You could then go and look to see if there's other properties that are for sale, maybe a little bit cheaper, that are close to the 20% rule that still meet the same criteria of what we just looked at. It's like, okay, there's more than just one property for sale that I could potentially purchase that would meet that 20% rule. It's like, okay, great. I have options in this area. That would give me even more confidence to say, yep, this is a market that I want to deep dive, study, and potentially enter, right? Or you can go back over to AirDNA, and go through even more properties and maybe different bedroom counts. Maybe you change it from, 4 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms or something along those lines. And you change up the properties that you're reviewing to try and find more properties that meet the 20% rule. Okay. And so you would repeat that process over and over again to either the process of reviewing, finding a property, a good listing an average property with good data, and then finding it on Zillow. That would be a comparable property that meets the 20% rule. That process you would repeat over and over again until you have done one of two things. You have confirmed that the market has revenue potential, or you have confirmed that it does not have revenue potential. And revenue potential is the ability to hit the 20% rule, right? And as an example here, I did go through Boise, Idaho, and honestly, I couldn't find a property that met the 20% rule. I went through quite a few of these over and over again. And what ended up happening was that the amount of revenue that was being made in comparison to the purchase price was just too low, and there wasn't enough money being made. And so, as an example, this property here was only making, $63,000 a year. If I put the criteria of a $300,000 home into where that property is located, you could very quickly see that the properties here, one's a trailer and one's a fairly smaller home. It's not nearly as nice as this one here. And it did not meet the 20% rule. And I repeated that process over and over again, and I was not able to find a profitable property within Boise. Now, you could go one of two ways on this. Okay. One is you go, I'm removing Boise from my short list. So I'm not going to look into Boise because I wasn't able to find anything on AirDNA. Or you may be thinking to yourself, I'm from Boise. I really want to try and make something work in Boise. So I'm going to get a profit map for Boise and I'm going to deep dive it a little bit further. And I'm going to try and find some sort of profit, even if it's more minimal profit within Boise, by truly deep diving it and building that buy box for Boise, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if I wasn't dying to go into Boise and build out an Airbnb business, just by following this high level process and not being able to find any properties that met the 20% rule, I would rule it out as a market to deep dive. I would say I'm not interested, right? But if you obviously you are interested, by all means, deep dive it, try to understand it, and try to make it work. But that is the process, guys. It's quite literally that straightforward. Do properties show up? Right? When you look on Zillow and you add all of your filters, do properties show up? If they do, you probably can, find very cash flowing, positive, profitable properties within that market. If they do not show up over and over again, then you probably can't. And just don't deep dive it. Don't waste your time deep diving it. So if you follow this process using the new AirDNA for only $15 a month, follow those 2 steps, you're going to be able to find a markets that likely will end up cash flowing, add it to your short list, and then deep dive them throughout the rest of this course. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll see you in the next video. How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be talking about max rent, which is a formula that I came up with years ago when I had a rental arbitrage business, and I used it to be able to quickly determine how much I could spend on rent for a property and still walk away with money in my pocket. And the reason I'm going to be explaining this to you right now before we get into deep diving the markets is because this is a quick way to know if a market has properties that would actually cash flow for you or not. Okay. So let me break down this template here and explain to you exactly how the formula works. And then we'll go and actually look into a market so you can quickly understand how we would use this to be able to, once again, quickly veto a market or pass a market. So, what you would first figure out is you'd figure out the general revenue potential of a property within the market that you're looking into. We're going to get into that. We're going to understand it. You'll be able to quickly have a gauge of okay, the properties here are roughly making about $80,000 a year. Okay. Then you're going to say to yourself, well, I want to make a certain amount of profit. Well, let's say you're like, I want to make $40,000 of net profit, money that you get to keep in your pocket and walk away with at the end of the year. Then what you're going to do is add in all of your additional expenses that you're going to have, right? And those are, in this scenario, right, we're kind of looking at like a 4-bedroom. These are what the expenses would look like for roughly about a 4-bedroom on an annual basis, which is going to work out to about $28,000 a year, right? If you take both of those numbers, so the amount of revenue, the amount of profit that you want to make, and then also all of your expenses, that adds up to $68,000 a year. This number down here is if you were to take your total revenue and then minus the total expenses and profit that you want to make, and that's the amount of money remaining. As you'll notice up here, I did not include the mortgage amount, or sorry, the rent amount in my expenses, which means that this remaining money is going to be going towards the rent. And so I have $11,920 I can spend on rent on an annual basis. So I then take that number and divide it by 12. And what you can see is that we are now left with $993 that you can go out and try and find a 4-bedroom in Atlanta, Georgia, and walk away with $40,000 of profit if it made $80,000 a year. Obviously, that's not going to happen, right? I don't know Atlanta, Georgia. I just know that there's no 4-bedrooms that cost under $1,000 that are going to make $80,000 a year. It just doesn't happen, right? Especially now in today's environment. So then you have to tell yourself, all right, well, what if I only made $20,000 a year in profit? What does that look like? Well, now you can see that you have a max rent of $2,660. And so what you would do is you would use this as the maximum amount of rent that you can pay when you're going out and looking for a property. And so you would have already kind of figured out what a home needed to look like to make $80,000 a year. You would have like a general understanding of what those homes look like, the size of them, the way that they're designed, the amount of what their backyards look like, all those different things. You would have a quick understanding. So then you could easily head over to Zillow, right? And you could, let me make myself a little bit smaller here. You could easily head over to Zillow and tell yourself, well, I know all of these properties are within this general range of Atlanta, okay? And then you go, well, I can only spend about $2,600 a month on rent. and I know I'm looking at a 4 bedroom only, and I know that I need it to be a house, and I know that it needs to be, whatever else you got to put in here. Maybe it needs to have a pool or something along those lines, right? But in this scenario, let's say it doesn't. Then what you would do is you would then look at the properties on the right hand side here and see that there are actually quite a few properties that are available for under that $2,600 a month rate price. However, what matters is, do these homes match up with the homes that you're looking at on Airbnb? Okay. And so what I mean by that is, like, when we get into it, you're going to go through, once again, I'm going to teach you all of this about how to know what the properties look like, and know which ones are making that amount. But what you'll notice is that maybe with all these, you can kind of see this is small, 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 small. And maybe all those homes that you're looking at that were making the $80,000 a year, they were actually quite a bit larger. They were newer builds, and they weren't actually near this side of the town. They were actually over here. And so then everything would tell you that it didn't, all these homes that you're looking at didn't match up with the homes that are actually making 80,000, and therefore none of these would actually hit that $80,000 a year because they're too small and in the wrong location. And so therefore you know that even though there's properties for rent for under 2,600, you know that those properties don't meet the requirements to make 80,000. Therefore, you wouldn't make that $20,000 a year, and therefore these properties do not make sense to rent, and therefore you're not going to get a 4 bedroom in Atlanta. And then from there you go, okay, well, maybe I go and look at 3 bedrooms, or I go look at 5 bedrooms, or go and say, Atlanta's just not going to work for what I'm trying to do. I'm going to veto it. I'm going to go find another market that I'm going to enter into. And that's why the max rent calculation is extremely helpful and beneficial to quickly veto a market or determine that a market is going to be cash flow positive or not. Now, as an example, without just sort of walking away and being like doom and gloom, I have recently done some research on Atlanta, and I found this property here that was making $110,000 a year, right? You can see that number right there, 109,000. If I click this and open it up, you can see that it is the same link that I was just looking at. And if you quickly look at this property, you can see it's got it's well designed. It's not very large. It's got a nice little modern kitchen here. It's, once again, really well put together. The backyard's good too. The interior is great. Everything's good about this property. Well, if I had this metric and I said, okay, this property is making $110,000 a year, and I want to make $40,000 a year in profit, and all of this being true, okay, like staying as is, those are going to be the expenses, then that tells me that I have a max rent amount that I can spend of $3,500, right? So then I would go out and, using this same little circle here, I would say I want it to be a 5+ bedrooms. Now it's got to be an even bigger home. And my max rent is now going to be let's put it at 30, what was that? 35? Yeah, so 35. So I go, okay, are there any properties available that meet that metric? And then I would end up coming across this property, which has a very similar type of kitchen, a very similar sized living room and dining room, but it actually has a huge advantage here because it has this entire back garage that you could do a ton with, game room down here, more seating over here, stuff outside. The deck looks great as well. So it actually has a lot of advantages. The other one has a great backyard as well. But I know that this is my max rent amount. It meets most of the metrics that I was looking for, and it's designed very closely to what this one is designed as. And so then therefore, I feel confident that this property that I'm looking at, has the ability to make 110,000, and my max rent that I can spend on it is, just under 3,500, and that property was for rent for 3,500. So then therefore, I should be able to make 110,000 of gross revenue, therefore walking away with $40,000 of net profit. So money in my pocket that I get to walk away with and use and spend in my own personal life, right? So that's how the max rent calculator could also be used in a way to say, hey, there's properties that could potentially work here. Let's go and explore it a little bit further and deep dive this market, which is, once again, what I'm going to be teaching you down the road as we continue through this course. So I hope that makes sense. It's really not that complicated. You're just trying to find a number where it's like, I can't spend any more than this, because if I spend any more than this, then I'm not going to be able to make the amount of money that I want to make. And so it's a quick way to veto a market or determine that it has cash flow potential. I hope that makes sense, and I'll see you in the next video. How's it going, everybody? All right, so for this video, what we're going to be doing is a tutorial of the profit map. Now, most of you probably already know what the profit map looks like, how it's used, all those different things just from a lot of the other content that you would have seen from me online. However, with these new profit maps, there are some updates to them and some ways that we're going to be using them that is different than what I've used them in the past. And so please stick around, watch this. But anyone who's new here, this is going to be a complete overview for you as to everything about a profit map and how it works. Okay. So first off, we're looking at Atlanta, Georgia. So you can always tell what location you're looking at by the title. And then you can also see when it was last pulled. Now, mind you, within the software, you can pull a new one whenever you want, and it's going to update the date as to the time that you pull it. And so that's the, the tutorial on the title. And then on the left-hand side, what we have are all the different zip codes within Atlanta, and they're in order of where the most listings are to where the least amount of listings are. And then what do we have up here in row 2 are all of the bedroom sizes. So a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, so on and so forth as it continues down, right? Where these two connect, which would be here and here, this number represents the average of all the studios within that zip code. So the average annual revenue that they're making. It's technically the median because that way we get rid of any outliers. So if there's one person that was making, $100,000 more than everybody else, that's most likely bad data. So we use the median, which will avoid that. I just say average because it's easier. So the average annual revenue for a studio within this zip code would be $20,000 a year, right? The number behind this represents how many Airbnbs this average is making up. So there are 9 studios in this zip code that on average are making $20,000 a year, right? Now you understand the basics of the 4 numbers that you're looking at here to be able to know how to read the map, okay? And that's the majority of what you're going to need to understand, because now you could go to, let's say, the 1-bedrooms, and you could look for the highest number out of these 1-bedrooms, where I would stop right here and I could see that this one here is making, about $10,000 more than most of these other ones on average. And there's 72 Airbnbs that are making up that average, which is a ton of data. You can definitely make a decision based off of 72 different pieces of data. And so to me, this would be where I would potentially start looking for a deal because it's a higher average in comparison to the other locations. Therefore, there's better likelihood of me being able to cash flow. We will get into all of the strategies of how to analyze the profit map as we continue to go. I just want to give you a quick understanding of what you're looking at, okay? Now, some other things to point out here is that if I were to scroll all the way to the right-hand side, you're going to see the column that says grand total. And then this here represents how many Airbnbs there are in each zip code. So there's 266 Airbnbs in that zip code. Honestly, probably not going to use that. I'm just showing you that this is how we've organized the entire pivot table so that you can see, once again, where the most listings are to where the least amount of listings are. So naturally, there's going to be a lot less demand in an area where there's hardly any Airbnbs to begin with. All of this blank space just simply means that there are no Airbnbs in those areas. Very simple stuff, right? Now, the other thing is that this is a massive market, right? There's a lot of zip codes within Atlanta, Georgia. However, other maps are going to look something like this, right? So with this map, there's only 3 different zip codes. This is for Bend, Oregon. There's only 3 different zip codes, and it's very tight, clean, a lot easier to look at, read, and understand. But it's just a smaller market, right? So still useful and still gives us the answer as to which zip code you'd want to look into over the other ones, right? But there are going to be some markets that have literally only 1 zip code, and they have all of their data kind of lined up in this one format here, where you could say, well, 5 bedrooms are making quite a bit more than 4 bedrooms, and 4 bedrooms are making quite a bit less than, 3 bedrooms are making less than 4 bedrooms. You get the idea. It's a lot more simple with these types of locations where there's only 1 zip code. And because of that, there's a different way to analyze the data, which I'm going to teach you, But for now, I'm just going to show you how to access the data, and for a market like this, that'll make it better to analyze, okay? Which is right down here, there's this little 3 dots, and you click that, or sorry, 3 lines, and you're going to see 2 other things, tabs here that are hidden. So one is referred to as simple data, the other one is sheet 1. I'm going to open up sheet 1 first, and then we'll go into simple data. So with sheet 1, this is what it looks like, okay? There is a outrageous amount of data on every single Airbnb. So you can see right here, this is that's an Airbnb, that's another Airbnb, that's another Airbnb. And so there is a lot of data here on all the different little possible things that you could ever want to know about when it comes to the Airbnb listing, including the check-in time and the checkout time and their ratings and how well they did with cleaning compared to value in their ratings and all of these different things. Now, personally, I find most of this to be useless. And the whole purpose of the profit map is to make things simple, more accurate, and actionable. And so I've just left this in here for anybody who wants to really get into that. So the data nerds who really want to dissect that information, it's there for you. You can go through it. However, the vast majority of everyone else, including myself, we're just going to need the simple data. So I've taken all that information and I've narrowed it down to what I believe is the most, all the information that you need to know. In other words, this is the only information that I use. So as you can see, it goes all the way up to row column Q here, and there's nothing else beyond that. And the main things that we're looking at are the listing title, annual revenue, the Airbnb link, the number of reviews. This is how we're going to be tracking the data and making notes on the data. Then we can see the bedrooms, the occupancy, the average daily rate, the bathrooms, guest amenities. The lat and long is going to be useful when we need to use the mapping tool. And then we have a couple more things there that honestly probably don't need to be in there. But these are all the columns and all the data points that I find to be the most useful. These ones here are probably going to be the ones that you use the vast majority of the time. Actually, these ones here, with these ones coming in handy when you're trying to determine, one from the other. And then the lat and long is obviously super helpful when it comes to mapping the actual data. And this is just a good way to keep track of each listing. So with all that being said, these are the different options and tools and resources that you have within the actual profit map. And once again, I will be teaching you everything else about this. Now, one thing though that I forgot to mention and didn't say earlier, and I apologize, is that when you're looking at all this data on here on the profit map, it's helpful, but it's really just the step 1. It's where you're using this to figure out where you want to deep dive. So where in Atlanta should you do a deeper analysis? Should you focus in on 4 bedrooms in this zip code, or should you focus in on 1 bedrooms in this zip code, right? There's so many different locations that you deep dive to be able to get the answers that you're trying to get. And so when you've selected a location that you wanted to look into, which is this one right here, which is the one I was going over earlier, you would then either right click this and go show details, or you just double click it. And when you do that, it's going to pop open all of that simple data that I was showing you in the other tabs, but it's going to make its own tab down here. And so as you can see, it says detail 1, and then it has the zip code, and then it has the number 1 back there because that represents a 1 bedroom. So that's how you can determine, what is in this tab in comparison to what's over in this tab, right? And so as you can see, we now have all of the simple data, and it's just the 1 bedrooms for that specific zip code that you just clicked into. And they're in order as to who's making the most to who's making the least, which is extremely important, right? And so this is where you're going to be spending the vast majority of your time, is on these tabs once you've decided which location you're going to be looking into. Okay, so that is everything that I wanted to cover with the profit map, the different updates that we've made to this, all the little metrics that you're going to need to know. I apologize. I got one more thing I want to mention. So another thing that is going to happen when we're in here, and I probably don't need to talk about it on this video, but there's going to be a lot of the times where we're going to be filtering out data that I either have found useful or not useful. And that is where we're going to use the filter option, which is this little thing right here that kind of looks like a funnel. And if you click the this number one right here, it's going to select the entire row. As you can see, it's all selected. And then once we've done that, you can click the create a filter. And now all of a sudden everything is a filter, right? It's all filterable, in other words. So what I mean by that is I can come to here, and let's say that I was looking at the max guest section. I now have the option to do these different filtering tools for this specific column. And so let's say that I didn't want to see anybody that didn't have 4 guests with the 1 bedrooms within this specific area. I can unselect all of those and press OK. And now I'm only going to be looking at the homes that have 4 guests, right? And that's all these ones that are here. Now, I will teach you, the different ways that I use these filters to be able to review it. The main way is, most likely just going to be removing the good and the bad data. So you're only looking at the information that you need to be looking at. But I just wanted to make sure that you understood how to use that filter option, or how to add it at least. And throughout the videos moving forward, you will learn more and more about how to use this strategically within your research. That is everything that I wanted to cover. And so if you have any questions on that, please reach out and let me know. How's it going? All right, so for this video, what I'm going to be teaching you is how to read a profit map. So this is going to be a raw version of me reading the Austin, Texas profit map to be able to determine where I would potentially want to look into to try and find a profitable property. Because with a location that is a major city, there's so many different zip codes that you could go into. There's so many different bedroom counts that you could look into. There's so many different ways of looking, and there's a lot of information here, right? It's like, how do you read this? Where do I go? Where do I start? Is the sort of like main question and concern that a lot of people have. And so I'm going to give you a breakdown of how I would be reviewing this in a variety of different ways to then determine which market or which zip code and which bedroom count that I'd be looking into. So the first version is this someone were to be looking for a 1 bedroom, right? So say you were to be trying to get 10 units within a 1 building, and you're going to rental arbitrage all those properties. Or you're going to be somebody who's getting a 1 bedroom condo within a major city, and that's what you want to be doing when it comes to Airbnbs. Simply, what I would do is go straight to the 1 bedrooms. Now, in the scenario of you could get a studio or you could get a 2 bedroom, they would all, you could do either of those. That's definitely possible, but I'd be focusing in on the 1 bedrooms and just trying to see where the most money was being made for 1 bedrooms. And then typically wherever a lot of money is being made for a 1 bedroom in that same general zip code or area, the studios of the 2 bedrooms are going to be doing just as well. So like the 1 bedroom is that medium between the two. And then I always like to just highlight the top and then simply look for the biggest number with the most amount of data behind it. So the most amount of listings within that area. Now, right off the bat, we can see that we have 2 locations that are doing fairly similar, but they have a lot of data behind them, a lot. So there's 162 listings here. That's telling me that half of these people are doing better than 33,000 and half of these people are doing worse than 33,000, which is just as terrifying. So in other words, there's a lot of opportunity to go one way or the other with this market. I'm not fully ready to go look into this location just yet, but I feel the exact same way about this one here. Then you get to this third one, and it's very clearly $10,000 less on average and significantly less data. So it's an easy one to veto and just continue to move on from. Then we hit this one, which is doing $43,000 a year, which is actually pretty interesting. It doesn't have nearly as much data behind it, but it is doing about $10,000 more than this one. But once again, not nearly as much data, so it'd probably be just as good as this one, maybe even a little bit worse. The next one we hit is 37, and there's 66 listings behind it. This, to me, is, again, good. This is a lot of data. It's still a fairly high number, especially in comparison to all these other ones we just looked at. So these first four out of the 5, I'm intrigued by, right? And then this is where it starts getting interesting. So now we have this one doing $28,000 on average, but there's 57 active rentals. So here's why it's interesting, because the one directly above it has, a few more, 9 more listings, but on average, they're doing $10,000 more. So it's very clear that this zip code trumps this zip code when it comes to 1 bedrooms. That is just a super obvious, because there's almost the exact same amount of listings, but on average, they're doing $10,000 more. So therefore, this would be a zip code that you would very obviously ignore, right? And then the next one is this similar idea, right? It's not doing as much, and it has even less data, which is even worse. once again, even worse, 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 worse. So as you can see, as you continue to go down here, there's nothing really that's standing out that's saying like, hey, this is a really great zip code. It seems like all of the best one bedroom zip codes were really truly right at the very top because there was a lot of data to back them up and the averages were a little bit higher. You could look at this one and say, hey, the average is actually just as high as these ones up here. But it only has 13 listings compared to 66, which means that for this one here, there's 33 people doing better than 37. And for this one here, there's somewhere between 6 or 7 people that are doing better than 37,000. So this one up here is going to have more competition, but also way more odds of actually being able to hit those numbers. So if I were to be looking for one bedrooms within the Austin, Texas area, I would without a doubt be looking into these two. I would skip over this one. I would look into these two. And then I think that would be it. Yeah. And then I would probably avoid all these. Now, that's where I would start my research. Okay. That's where I would start my research. I'm fully confident that if I were to actually look into these areas, they're probably the downtown core where the rent is going to be a little bit higher for that. And even the condo prices are going to be higher as well, right? They're probably nicer places that are making more money. And so then therefore, the reality is that even though they're making more money, they're going to cost more. And so will they cash flow well? Maybe, right? But at the same time, there's also possibilities that a location like this one isn't in the downtown core. Maybe it's quite a bit further away from the downtown core. They're still making $31,000 on average, right? And so maybe within this zip code, I can actually find a one bedroom with cheaper rent that's going to still I'm still going to be able to walk away with $30,000 a year, right? So this zip code and some of these other zip codes still could have a ton of potential to be a profitable Airbnb. However, I am just telling you where I would start my research, and I'd start it where the most money is being made because that tends to be where you're going to get the best cash flow. Okay. So that's how I would look at it for the one bedrooms. The only additional thing that I'd potentially do is just try to see if maybe the studios were if maybe the studio rent is obviously going to be cheaper. So would a studio make the same amount as a one bedroom? And I'd be trying to veto or determine that before actually getting before actually renting the property, right? And as you can see, the studios here are making $38,000 a year. These ones are also making $38,000. However, there's more than double the amount of data over here, which means that there's more potential to make more money with one bedroom. Just at a very quick glance, that does not mean that the studio would not be able to make money. I'm just saying at a quick glance, okay? And then the same logic applies for the two bedrooms as well. You can just simply go look at them, and you can see that they're doing about $20,000 more than the one bedrooms on average, and they almost have the same amount of data. So as if the two bedrooms weren't significantly more expensive to rent, then it might make more sense to just go with a two bedroom rather than a one bedroom. Okay. This is how I'm reading this profit map and determining which area I want to look into. This is one of my favorite things about the profit map is that it's in order of where the most listings are to where the least amount of listings are. And that usually means where there's the most demand, where the most money is being made. And so everything tends to be in the top part here where you want to be looking, because that's, once again, where the most demand is. And then as you get further down, this is where it really doesn't matter. You're really not looking into almost any of these zip codes because there's not enough demand for those areas. Now, it doesn't mean, once again, that there's no money to be made down here or in these zip codes. It's just not likely going to be as high of revenue. And so if it isn't going to be as high of the revenue that you're seeing up top, then the home value has to be significantly cheaper, or the rent has to be significantly cheaper. Okay. So that's how I view things when it comes to that first scenario there. If we're to be getting into the next scenario, it's a very similar process or logic that I just walked you through for everything else in the rest of the city. So if I were to be looking to get a single family home within Austin, I would probably look at the 4 bedrooms, because the 4 bedrooms are kind of the median between the 3s and the 5s, right? Because 3, 4s, and 5s tend to be the most often built sized home, with 3 bedroom being the most common, 4 bedroom being slightly more, but tends to make a little bit more revenue, and then not a lot of 5 bedrooms tend to be made. And you can easily tell that just by how many active listings you can see here between each one of these different bedroom counts. So just like I was using the 1 bedrooms between the studios and the 2 bedrooms, I'm using the 4 bedrooms between the 3 bedrooms and the 5 bedrooms. Okay, it's just the way that I like to do things. I feel like it makes things a lot easier. And then I'm using the exact same process and the exact same logic again. I'm highlighting the 4 bedrooms, and I'm going to go down the row and try to see where I think there is the most potential or most money being made. to then once again determine which zip code to look into. So the first one I see is 117, but it's got 28 listings behind it, whereas this one is 134 with 57. So as you remember, the more data behind this number, the better it's going to be, right? Because there's even more people making almost the exact same amount of people than this zip code are making more than $134,000 a year. So to me, this is super intriguing. It's obviously a place where there's way more money being made in comparison to this zip code. So therefore, it would make more sense to look into this one first in comparison to this one. Additionally, this zip code here, so that what I'm trying to say is that is super interesting, but let's keep going down, right? And as you get to the next one, very obviously there's no money being made there, so you would skip over that. You can see this one is at 161, which is nice and higher than 134. However, there's only 8 active rentals, whereas this one has 57. So I'm not saying that it's not possible to do anything here. It's nice to see that those 8 rentals are averaging 161. That tells me that there's likely something going on there, especially when you compare it directly to the one below that's only at 112, right? And it has almost the same amount of rentals. So I would obviously want to look into this one way more than I want to look into this one, and way more than this one as well. So at a first glance, I'm already know that I want to look into this zip code really badly, right? And then once I finish looking into this zip code, I would probably want to take a look at this zip code, and potentially even this one as well, just because there's so many active rentals here. So I'd be like, okay, well, there's 28. They're doing 117, but there's 28, right? This one's doing 161, but there's only 8. And so to me, I'm like, well, maybe there's more data here and more reliability, and maybe I can, do a little bit better. But I'm still going to check out this zip code at one point. I'm never going to look into this one. That's just an obvious. I'm never going to look into this one. That's obvious as well, right? And then I would keep going, and I could see like, okay, this one's at 100, but there's 15 listings. I don't love this. It's obviously better than this zip code. I don't love this, but my thought once again is like, is the real estate cheaper here, right? Is the rent cheaper here for this? Because if it is, then I can still cash flow, even though I'm going to be making less than some of these above ones. And that same logic just continues to apply. So you're constantly just trying to see which one is slightly better. So I can see this one, I can see 130, but there's only 2 active rentals, so I ignore that. I see 124 and there's 8 active rentals. So I'm super intrigued, right? We're now down where there's not that many active rentals, where there's a lot of like random data and the homes aren't making nearly as much. But yet we run into this one location that has 124 and they have 8 active rentals. I can also see that the 5 bedrooms, there's 5 active rentals and they're doing really well also. The 3 bedrooms are not doing nearly as well. So for some reason, the 4s and the 5s here tend to be doing really well. That is super intriguing. I would definitely want to look into that and try to understand exactly what's allowing them to do that. And so as you can see, the logic that I was using with the 1 bedrooms applies as well with the 4 bedrooms too. And the way that you kind of look at the 3 bedrooms compared to the 4 and 5s, you kind of bring them all together. Okay. So again, that's how that would work. Now, this is where we get to the sort of next level of things and why I love the profit map so much. Because what if you wanted a mansion? What if you wanted a really large home that was going to give you a massive competitive advantage over everybody else, and you wanted to be able to have that home in Austin, right? Whatever it may be. Maybe you're going to have it for weddings, or maybe you just want to host bachelorette and bachelor parties, and you want to make these really, really high numbers that you're seeing here. The issue is that if you were to use that same logic that I've just been talking about with the 6, 7, and 8s, and even with the 5 bedrooms, you're barely going to find any zip codes that show any potential proof, because I'll never look into this zip code that only has 1, 2, 3, even 5 or 6. I don't like looking into zip codes that have that minimal amount, just simply because I know that, maybe 1 or 2 of those is going to be bad data. And then there's not going to be like a good pattern within that data. And so even for the 5 bedrooms, obviously Austin is different because there's a lot here that are making a really great amount. So I would definitely look into that. But I would be following this other process I'm going to show you right now to be able to look into these sized homes. Okay. And the process that you would do is typically this is hidden. So you would have to click the 3 dots here and you have to go to simple data. And when you do that, you now are on the simple data tab, and you would have already watched the tutorial on simple data. So I'm not going to explain it again. But if I would have already clicked this and created a filter, which you can see I've done that. And then what I would do is I would go to the bedroom filter option. I would clear all, and then I would just select the 6, 7, 8, 9, and 13 bedroom homes. And then I would click, and then I would have just those homes now that are showing, okay? And I would have them in order of who's making the most to who's making the least. And this is where I would look for all of these properties. This is where I'd be looking at all of these properties to try and figure out what is the trend between all of these. Like, what are these homes doing that's different than everybody else? And then with this, this here is different because now we're at the next step, right? The next step is like, okay, well, now I have to start analyzing all this data and trying to figure it out, right? Whereas what I'm just trying to explain to you here is how do you read this profit map, okay? So we will get into how do you then analyze all this information. And like probably one thing that you're wondering is like, well, we've been staring at all these different zip codes as we go through. You know, when we do this, we have all the different zip codes combined. And yes, you're right. There's a mapping tool we're going to use to be able to see exactly where these performers are. And I'm going to be getting into that as we go into all the additional training. So what I'm trying to get across in this video is a way of looking at the profit map. And I'm going to just try to summarize all that information into a simple logical process that you can use as you can use it for yourself if you're looking into a major city. The thought process is go to the bedroom count. That's the in between. Okay. That's sort of where you want to start. Okay. That'd be the 1 bedrooms for this size or the 4 bedrooms for this size, maybe even 3 bedrooms if that's where you want to kind of fall between. Regardless, that's what you want to do. Okay. Then you want to just simply go down the list and look for the highest number you can see. Make it super simple. Just look for the big number, right? And then also look for a big number behind it. And if there's a good amount of data behind it that supports this number, that's telling you that you likely can find a good pattern within that data that would allow you to then go and potentially be able to have the confidence to buy that property. But keep in mind that the higher that number is, the higher that this number goes. Okay, so as an example, I'm just going to open these two up. I know I was summarizing, but I'm just going to open these two up so you can see exactly what I mean by that. So if I open this one up, you can see there's a whole, this is the first one with 162 active rentals, right? Half are doing worse and half are doing better. But those half that are doing better, there's a lot of listings here doing over $50,000 a year, right? A lot of listings there, about 27 of them. Whereas in the other zip code, we have almost we have a lot of people that are actually doing over 50,000 as well, not nearly as much. So we only have 12 people that are doing over 50,000. And so what I'm trying to point out here, right? The reason I'm saying this is that even though this number is smaller than this one has more people that are making a higher amount than this average, just simply because there's a more data behind it. So I hope that makes crystal clear sense. Okay. So again, you choose, we're restarting. So you choose the one that's in between and you're looking for the biggest number with the most amount of data behind it to support it. And then you are deciding which one you want to look in first. Okay. You're like, okay, where do I start my research? Doesn't mean that that's the one you have to choose. You're going to veto that market or determine if it's a good zip code or a bad zip code. And then you're going to move on to the next one. So it's fine if you want to go in order, or whatever. I'm just trying to help you speed up this process. And so once you've done that, you've then selected it and you can then start deep diving it. And that's how that would work for, the 1 to 2 bedrooms and the 3 to 5 bedrooms. And then if you were to be looking into the data for the larger properties, that's a little bit more all over the place. That's where you would go to the simple data. Okay. And if you're in a market that does not have as much density and as many listings, you may just want to hop over to the simple data sooner than later to be able to see, how well are all the 4 bedrooms doing. And once again, I'm going to get into how to analyze all that data further in the training. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you understand the logic that I'm using when I'm trying to read a profit map and make sense of it. And so if you have any questions on that, please let me know, put in the comments and we can discuss it.